Hello, everyone. Happy Thursday. Welcome to this fourth, I would say, go. Yeah, this is our fourth go of our Education and Generative AI Roundup. As you start funneling in, open up the chat, introduce yourself. What's your name? What's your role? Where are you hailing from? What institution? Maybe it's PackBack. And then I'd love to hear, as you're introducing yourself, what's one way you've used generative AI in your course, or maybe just professionally or personally this fall, maybe if you're not a classroom instructor. So go ahead in the chat, introduce yourself, name, role, institution, and then one way you've used generative AI in your course. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Some housekeeping. Webinar recording and attendees certificate will be shared with all attendees within the next 2 days. Then you could always find recordings for all of these sessions at packback.co/webinars. Please ask all of your questions in the Q&A feature enabled, and then put all of your messages in the chat. Hello, Tracy. So use the chat for conversation, reflection, and then Q&A for questions, because I'll be monitoring the Q&A to answer. And without further ado, let's do some introductions of our panelists today. My name is Kelsey Beringer. I'm the CEO over at PackBack. I am a former high school chemistry and physics teacher. I used technology to help solve some of the problems they faced in the classroom. And I felt the need to, let's say, professionally evangelize technology in classrooms, which is exactly what brought me to PackBack. I've been here for about 6 years now and love hosting these webinars about the intersection of AI and education. Anna.
Hi, thanks, Kelsey. I'm Anna Haney-Withrow. I'm an instructional designer at Florida Southwestern State College and have sort of become the AI point person for the college in that role. I also teach humanities at Florida Gulf Coast University. That's like my hobby that I am lucky that I get to do. I've been in higher education since the 1990s, and so have seen a lot of different things come and go. Nothing quite so rapidly moving as AI, but also just super excited about the possibilities within it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dr. Rufus Glassberg.
Hello to everyone. Rufus Glassberg, President and CEO for the League for Innovation in the Community College and Chancellor Emeritus for the Maricopa Community Colleges.
Wonderful. So agenda for today's session, we'll hear an introduction from Dr. Rufus Glasper. We'll then have a panelist spotlight. So we're doing things a little bit differently. We're going to talk about some topics related to roles in the AI collaboration conversation. We're going to be talking about this AI spectrum and how we can approach this kind of, let's say, spectrum or these different roles in the conversation, some faculty messaging. We'll talk a little bit about AI in the news, and then we'll do some closing remarks and resources. And with any time we have, we'll answer questions that pop up in the Q&A feature. So again, please put your questions in the Q&A feature and your reflections and comments in the chat. So Rufus, I'll pass it to you for a brief introduction.
Thank you very much, Kelsey. Welcome, everyone. I just recently finished a seminar with a group of CEOs regarding the topic of generative AI. And I want to tell you that there were a lot of glazed eyes around the room. What we're trying to do right now from the League for Innovation perspective is to focus on the notion of thought leadership, innovation, and now this particular topic that is pushing all of us to the edge in terms of how we engage, who we engage, and how does it affect our practices, our policies, and quite frankly, if you look around the US, the politics that are involved. The League has been involved in a number of initiatives over the years, and for the most part, they center around the impact on faculty. And many of those issues that hold faculty back right now are cost and time. As we begin to look at this particular initiative, I want you to focus on what's happening in your institution. What message do you want to take back to leadership in order to get more support? And then think about how pervasive this technology will be, not only in the classroom, but in other parts of the organization, and how you can help lead that initiative, and quite frankly, calm down the angst of the leadership in your institution. So get engaged, share your thoughts, and please continue to follow our discussions around generative AI and share with others. Back to you, Kelsey.
Thank you so much. Well, we'll get started with our panelist spotlight. And today's panelist, Anna, we were doing a prep session for this webinar. And for these sessions, I'd kind of gotten used to the same format where we'll talk about what's happening in the news of AI in education, maybe talk about some new tools that are out there, do a little bit of a panelist Q&A, but became increasingly clear during our conversations that we were going to stray from the agenda, which you have to stay agile in 2023. That's just one thing that I know, and be flexible. And namely, you had expressed this desire to really dedicate the space today to talk about what it's actually feeling like to be on a campus, whether it's as an educator, administrator, or student, what it feels like right now, because this is, I would say, our first semester post the introduction of ChatGPT. We've had time to sit. What's actually happened now that we're here. And then when you introduced me to AI roles, so would you mind explaining a little bit about this concept, AI roles, how you got there? Yeah, just tell us the story.
Sure, I would love to. So one of the things that we did pretty quickly in our institution was develop a committee, and the committee started to have, as I'm sure many of you can relate to, some difficult conversations. People are coming from different places. They have different pressures. They see different opportunities and so on. I think difficult conversations are awesome. I think they're productive, and they're part of what we do in higher education. I've also been working with some other institutions to help them with their strategy, doing some talks and so on. And what I've seen is that we are now having the same difficult conversations over and over again. And so that no longer becomes productive. So for myself, I had to sit back and say, like, why? Who isn't being heard? And what's the resistance to all of these messages are crossing in the airwaves, and people aren't cohesive. And there started to be a sense of, honestly, divisiveness in some of the colleagues that I talked with in various institutions. So I really sat back and I thought, okay, we have to find a way to fix the conversation. Right now, especially, there's a great article that is linked in one of the resources we'll share later. Leon Furs is an author, and he said, AI is going to be in the woodwork in the way that electricity eventually got put in the woodwork soon. And our window to really be critical in these conversations may start to close. So that's sort of where this idea started.
Yeah, so before I introduce this concept of the roles, and I'll introduce the roles themselves, what's kind of like the purpose and the intention of impact of creating roles in this collaboration conversation?
I think the purpose is to further the conversation and to help people remember the best in their colleagues, right? When you're disagreeing with somebody and you feel, you're an innovator and you feel this profound sense of urgency, and someone that is your colleague feels like a roadblock or they can't hear what you're saying, that's frustrating. So to help us overcome that frustration, to help us see the best in our colleagues again, and honestly, to make progress, to be a leader. One thing I say over and over again is, what if higher education had done the kind of deep thinking we're capable of during the dawn of social media? What kinds of changes for the better could we have made, and what those outcomes eventually have been and are? And so elevating the conversation.
Yeah. Well, without further ado, I want to introduce the roles in the AI collaborative conversation. And these aren't my thoughts or my original ideas. I need to cite my source, which is you. So yeah, can you introduce the roles in the AI collaboration conversation?
Absolutely. So I started to sort of think about what are people saying? How are people showing up to serve? and so on. And then I use ChatGPT to help me figure out a good metaphor that would present that. And then I did, you know, a lot of my own writing around it. But right, the innovators, many of you may be innovators by nature, that you sort of, you see the big picture and you have this sort of driving sense to be moving in the direction that AI is taking us. And then there are guardians, people who really want to make sure that we don't lose something of value in the process of adapting to AI. Problem solvers are those people who just want to show up in the moment, make things better, and you know, bring their own unique set of skills and competencies. The analysts are the people who are asking the questions, and they're always the people who are like, well, what about privacy? And you're like, oh yes, thank you. Right. So they're reminding us of some of those important considerations. And then I think a lot of people are passengers. They know that this is a big deal, but it's not their passion, and it's they want to be responsible and get to the destination, but it's not really their thing that they own.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love these roles because, you know, we'll talk about like a spectrum, but I think a spectrum is really an oversimplification of what we're experiencing right now in academia. I think to label someone as anti-AI isn't actually, I would say, respectful of their approach to this conversation. Maybe something Guardian is more respectful of. They are trying to make sure we preserve student voice, that we preserve critical thinking. They are cautious to make sure that we don't sacrifice something in our pursuit forward, right? So I think I love this because I think, to your point, it helps folks actually move forward in these conversations. So I'd love to hear from you a little bit. How have you been using this framework in the work that you're doing on campus? Specifically, I believe you're a part of like the committee that's helping things move forward with AI. So yeah, how have you been using this, I would say, more tactfully?
Yeah, you know, so one important thing that I'll note here, because I think everybody probably had the thought, so let's just open it up. It may be that somebody is, you know, they would call themselves a guardian, but at a lot of institutions, you know, when I get asked to speak, the person who organizes it will often say to me, hey, we have this one faculty member who's going to be there, and they kind of don't always ask the best questions. They're kind of argumentative and so on. So there might be somebody who really truly isn't a guardian. I'm picking out that one. They really just are a person who's always throwing a roadblock at you. And you know that. And to try to convince yourself, you know, otherwise. But what if, even though that person has been coming at you with these negative thoughts for years, what if you decided I'm going to hold their contribution in the guardian space anyway? And what is it that you might hear that you ceased hearing from that person long ago because of the way they communicate or whatever? So I think for us, there's that. We're going to take this now out of our committee and into a college-wide conversation called AI Open Forum, and invite everybody, staff, faculty, students, to be part of the conversation and to bring their concerns, and just to have a place that is sort of that. And also for people to bring their excitement. I think some people are sort of like hiding in the hallways being like, hey, Anna, I did this thing. They're not really sure if they can share it out widely. So we want to create more of a culture of sharing.
Yeah, I like to call that nerding out is what I do. Just a proper nerd out. Well, while I have this image up, I'm going to launch a poll just for the audience to kind of self-identify based off of these different roles. Where are they at right now in the AI kind of collaboration conversation? I mean, shocker, I'm an innovator. You know, I think I have to be. I think it would be problematic if I wasn't. Maybe I'd be doing a poor job. But also want to hear as well, when you think about what role you were really playing in late 2022, early 2023, has it changed to today hasn't not changed. Maybe I know some folks have gone from, oh, you know what, it's not that big of a deal, I'm not going to pay attention to it, in January. They said, nope, this is just buzz. I'm going to be a passenger because I don't care. And then, oh, wow, okay, no, this this is actually something I have to pay attention to. And maybe they've shifted to more of an analyst of like, let me ask the questions, make sure I understand what's happening. So I'll leave this poll open for a few more moments. Go ahead. Who are you in the collaboration conversation? And maybe you play two roles. Maybe you're an innovator, but you're also a problem solver, or that's fine. Maybe if we have to just pick a percentage, the most. And then has your role changed? I'm seeing a lot of folks, and I'll end the poll shortly, have changed since the beginning of the conversation. And once you've answered this question, I'd love to hear in the chat, are there any difficulties you've run into being a member of your role? So as an innovator, what difficulties have you run into? As a guardian, what difficulties have you run into? As a problem solver, as a passenger, what have you run into that's maybe a little bit more difficult to navigate, where you're having a hard time moving forward? So I'd love to hear some thoughts.
Kelsey, can I ask Anna a question?
Yes, absolutely.
Given the different roles that we were just describing, is there an estimated percentage of an organization, regardless of what roles they might be in, if we're moving ahead with an initiative, is there an estimated percentage of the organization that needs to buy in order for it to be successful? Has there been any discussion like that in regard to where people might lie in an organization? I guess I'm asking, is there a possibility that we can move forward with AI and it will never be adopted and it will fail?
I'd love to hear from Anna. I have my thoughts, but I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I'm not so certain that it's a percentage of people in these roles. I think it's really healthy to have a nice distribution in the roles. I think that it's about leadership. And I think what I love about where I am is if we have a very deep culture of innovation, and that starts like literally from the president of the college. And certainly, I'm an IT, our leader, we have an AVP of strategic innovation. So we're very lucky in that way. So I think it has a lot to do with leadership. And other than that, I would just say a healthy distribution is probably a good thing. What do you think, Kelsey?
Yeah, I think 100% buy-in is never going to happen. And we're going to talk about this concept in a minute, which is, I think about when I taught, I was at a one-to-one device school at my second year or my third year of teaching. And there were some instructors that I worked with that said, no, I'm not using devices. It slows me down. Takes 10 minutes to get everything set up. It takes 10 minutes to break everything down. I've got 50 minutes with my students. I have 30 minutes left for instruction. And that's on a perfect day, right? So I think no matter what, let's say an administration chooses or a culture chooses, there's always going to be a subset of folks who don't necessarily follow the path laid in front of them. But I do think that as long as it's a path where our students are top of mind and we're serving the end goal, which is it to get our students more engaged? Is it prepare them for the future? As long as we're all aligned on the same vision of the end state, I think we're okay. But I do think there is space for maybe not everyone to get on the exact same ship altogether, as long as we're maybe getting to the same private island together. That's my analogy for today.
I like it. Yeah, I think that's really true. And I think there is, sometimes I'm seeing some stuff in the chat of people are saying it's hard to be a guardian in the higher education culture these days. And I think that's very true. And we favor certain ways of teaching and learning now. And we make it difficult for people whose styles might be different.
Yeah. So Rufus, you laid us up perfectly for what we're going to talk about next. So thank you. Which is, we've talked about roles, but a lot of times it's felt a little bit like a spectrum, like the emergence of ChatGPT, this kind of like AI going mainstream. It's felt like we've shifted into a spectrum instead of maybe different roles. And I literally Googled generative AI educator spectrum, and this was the very first result I got, was the AI free, human brains only, AI friendly, use responsibly. I don't hate this image, right? I just think it's a little bit of oversimplification. But in our earlier conversations, we were talking about really feeling a lot of empathy towards this idea of the traditional teacher right now. So we're going to talk a little bit about the topic of a traditional teacher. Again, I'm probably using an oversimplified phrase here, but Anna, could you speak a little bit more to the conversation we were having and this like kind of empathy we're having right now for them?
Yeah, right. So as a more constructivist approach to teaching and learning has become prominent, and there's some really awesome things about that. But there's sort of this disparaging of the old ways, as though nobody had ever been successfully educated before, we came up with these new ideas, and that, that there's one that we've taken what was a one size fits all approach and said, hey, we're just subbing that out with this new one size fits all approach. And what I would really rather see for students is a robust mix of different kinds of learning experiences. So depending on somebody's skills in the classroom, depending on their subject matter, right? It's really easy for me, as I teach intro to humanities, it's really easy for me to get creative. My students don't have to memorize the periodic table, for example. So thank goodness, because I would be the wrong person to have there if they did. It would be all you. So I really think there's something to be said. If somebody is an amazing lecturer and they can hold students' attention for 20 or 30 minutes, man, that may be actually helping them skill build in a way that, what's old is new. That may be something that we had in my generation that in my daughter's generation, they don't. So I really think that when we say things like, oh, the sage on the stage, and all of these things that disparage more traditional approaches, we need to be a little bit careful. So I don't blame people who may have different ways of approaching their classrooms or more traditional ways for being a little bit defensive right now. And some of the way we're languaging what's happening with AI would probably make such a person feel even more defensive. So why not include them rather than saying, okay, this is proof that you actually finally need to change? Because I don't think it necessarily is.
Yeah, I love that. And I think about too, one of my favorite professors I had in college, it was like maybe a 25 to 30 person analytical chemistry course. So this is a course that nobody's excited to take, right? But you walked in and he was very talk and chalk, but he was also calling on us for our opinions and had very much like I would say a Socratic approach. And there was not an ounce of Wi-Fi in that classroom. And it was before Wi-Fi was probably as readily available. I didn't have a smartphone at the time. I had a flip phone in this experience, but I think about how engaging that classroom was, and that instructor probably wasn't thinking, how can I engage my students more? I need maybe a cool new technology. Now, I do think there is something to be said about, oh, I'm preparing my students for the future of their careers. How can I prepare them? It might be a future in which they need to work with technology. But he wasn't necessarily not achieving really powerful results in his methodology. And when we were talking about this, I had a bit of a aha moment. And to Rufus's point, do 100% of instructors need to hop on, let's say, like an AI bandwagon? Again, I think that's an oversimplification. Or can we respect and incorporate every type of approach to teaching and learning? And I think you had said this, it's don't our students deserve diversity in the way in which they're learning new information and interacting with instruction?
Yeah, and don't they deserve professors who are happy to be in their classrooms? right? Don't they deserve professors who feel like their unique abilities are honored and valued where they are? And so I think there's something to be said for that. So one of the really interesting things, Kelsey, that we found out talking informally with employers locally and nationwide, we wanted to get a sense right from the horse's mouth about what's the workforce implication of this, specifically for the classes of 24 and 25, right? They're sort of in the gap classes. And what we heard from them a lot was we want them to be prepared to talk about the ethical implications of AI. And so there were some, depending on industry, you know, there were some people that wanted specific ways of using, but across industries, we saw people wanted students to be prepared to talk about the ethics. And I think that can happen in any kind of a classroom.
Yeah, I love that. And we were talking about this concept of, okay, I'm a more traditional teacher. I love my talk and talk. I love my classroom. We have great energy. I have great engagement from my students. I don't want to bring up and have them use ChatGPT. I don't want to be using AI tools in my teaching because it, again, I think to your point, I've found something that makes me happy. It makes my students happy. Can I continue forward? But then there's this question of, okay, for any educator, regardless of how they want to incorporate technology, what did we need to make sure our students are ready and know in their futures? And doing something like having just a discussion about AI ethics. I even think of, I think even myself, I'm guilty of this, just the skill and the instinct to fact check information. I can argue that's been a gap for years, especially with like the emergence of social media and some folks using social media as truth, or they're a source of, you know, peer-reviewed data. And now generative AI is just going to make it even more important for us to encourage our students to fact check, teach them how to fact check. Any teacher could do that regardless if they're using AI or not.
Absolutely. Absolutely agree. Yeah, I think that's a great one. And just literacy in general.
Yeah, absolutely. And they just, in order to I think like get the best results from GPT and actually use it well, you need to understand what good writing is and what good rhetoric is and what engaging writing is, or else you'll just have bad stuff.
Yeah.
Well, okay, let's talk about the other side of this AI spectrum, which is the use responsibly AI friendly educator, the educator who cannot wait to incorporate, let's say, ChatGPT in their assignments, or use AI tools, or save time grading with AI, or, you know, give their students additional sources with AI. You know, I think of, these are the folks, when I think about my friends who I think of as innovators, they're like, they were the first people to have like Bluetooth gadgets in their kitchen, you know, like a Bluetooth meat thermometer. They had an iPhone when I had a flip phone, right? And these are folks who are just always ready to try new things. They pick up on it quickly and they're able to make an impact, I think, pretty quickly. So, you know, what do you think? And I don't know if, Anna, you classify yourself as like an innovator, but what are some of the biggest difficulties you believe innovators are running into right now in kind of this AI collaboration conversation?
It's a great question. So I think one of the things, you know, as a learning designer, I have to remind everyone, lead with your outcomes. If using generative AI is not the best way to achieve your outcome, then you need to set it aside. So that's an important one to remember. But other than that, I think there are issues with student privacy, and there are issues around access that we need to be very thoughtful about. Go talk to your analysts, go talk to your guardians, figure out how to move forward responsibly given those constraints. But I'll share from my own experience something that was really interesting. I'm having my humanities students use generative AI pretty robustly in our course, and I think it's going well. But there was an assignment that didn't go as well. And what I realized was I gave them too much ability to rely on AI without enough guidance on what might be good. So they were using, they had the option to use AI to come up with a story that illustrated a particular point, or they could go back and use a personal experience to illustrate the point. The students who use the personal experience far outperformed the students who used AI. The AI generated stories were lame in some cases and flat out problematic in others. And they did not go back to see, like, do I really want my name on this? Because it's kind of lame, or that's pretty culturally insensitive. They just put it in there because they could. And that was a real learning moment for me of like, there's a paper that recently, yeah, you've got this on a slide, right? Where consultants and a large group of researchers, they asked these consultants to use AI or not use AI. And what was happening, they were calling it falling asleep at the wheel. So in some cases, when there was access to good AI tools, the consultants actually performed less well. And they, got intellectually lazy, I guess is not a very nice way to put it. We'll leave that part out of the conversation. But to shortcut it for our purposes, that there were a lot of gains. There's a lot of good things that we saw, but when it was relied upon too much, they actually performed less well. And that was for sure my experience there. And of course, I'm hoping to turn it into a teachable moment where I show them like, hey, this didn't go that well. Let's talk about why. And let's come up with a way to do it somewhat differently next time. So my mantra there is awake and aware. That is what we need to be, and that is what we now need to be training them to be, because they will use these tools in the workplace without a doubt.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the teachable moment. I think one of the best things we could do for students, because they want to learn, they want to be taught, they want to have open, honest conversations with their instructors, is to say, this is an example of something that was written by ChatGPT. I hated it. I allowed it. I told somebody to do it and I hated it. My bad. And then this was something that was written by somebody's unique experience, authentic voice, and I loved it. It was so much better to read. In this specific example, let's have you use your own voice and your own experience. In this example, use GPT because it moved faster and it was more effective. So it's like helping them understand the type of tasks that are appropriate for AI and ones that end up like really, I would say, to your point, like decreasing the output. Just show them examples. They're going to be happy to hear it. And speaking of, I think, the innovators and some of the difficulties of the innovators, and you talked to this a little bit, there's a question right now in the Q&A. Does deeper and or broader use of AI for higher education maybe lead to equity issues for those who lack the knowledge or access to technology? So Anna, I don't know what your thoughts have been on access to technology and how quickly we're incorporating, let's say, AI into instruction.
It's a really great question. And this is where, we all were sort of caught without an institutional response, and which is one of the frustrations, I think, in this conversation. So it's been hard for us on the IT side to push out guidance as quickly as faculty members are needing it. Absolutely. I will say this. Anytime you're using technology, there's a question of equity, and it should always be at the forefront. So even if you think, oh, I'm just asking them to log into the learning management system. Well, what does that look like in a more rural part of Florida, where I am, for example? So absolutely, there's a question of equity. And what I would say is my personal way that I deal with it is I am presenting generative AI in my course as a potential collaborator. There's no assignment for which they can copy and paste the output as their assignment. So I'm training them to use it in that way. So what I will say is, if you're uncomfortable for any reason using an AI collaborator, another way to collaborate would be to interview somebody. Another way to collaborate would be to use this kind of a resource at the library. And so one of the things I'm doing after my little weird AI story situation is I'm creating a collaboration sheet that goes with every assignment. How did you collaborate with another type of resource, whether it's AI, library, interview, for this assignment, and show your work, show your sources.
Yes, and I think even in our prep session, we were talking a little bit about how there's always going to be the question of access too, because there was an issue a few months back where access to GPT was pretty unstable or unstable unless you had GPT-4 or GPT Pro. So you paid the $20 a month to get more stable access to it, more consistent access. There's an equity conversation right there. And so we were talking a lot about this concept of, if you are an innovator, if you want to bring in AI, just be mindful of every student's experience, including the experience of the student who maybe doesn't have access, or the experience of a student who had really, let's say, a poor experience with AI. Maybe they, in a different class, were accused of using AI to write a paper, scarred by that experience, and then they get to your class and they're being told that they need to use AI to write, and they're like, no, I can't. I was almost just expelled for doing that, right? So I think we need to be really mindful of the student experience. And to your point, I think autonomy and choice is a great way to, I would say, at least a short-term solution, maybe long-term, address these equity conversations of how can we give our students choice and how they want to complete this assignment, because maybe AI isn't the path for them. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Anna, but that's something that came to me in our prep conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So I will say that students are, we are hearing from students, they are frustrated with our inconsistent messaging. And they are having experiences of AI outside the classroom. At first, a lot of them thought that it was just like somebody invented a cool like cheating machine. They didn't know that it had other applications and so on, right? But now they're starting to it's starting to show up in how they're using social media and so on. And they are starting to see, oh my gosh, I majored in digital art. And now what? Now what's going to happen to the kind of entry-level jobs that I thought I was preparing myself for initially? So they have some complex feelings around it. And we tend to homogenize students and say, oh, they love technology and they know more than we do and they want to use it all the time. And that's not probably very accurate. So I think we need to include students in the conversation, find out what their experiences are, and get our messaging a little bit more finessed so they aren't like, I can't do that. Why are you trying to bust me?
Yeah. Oh gosh, this has to be so confusing. Their brains are already finishing developing, you know what I mean? They don't have full brain cells yet. So it's got to be, I think, quite complex. And yeah, there are studies that are, I think it's like, it was back in April, I think 50% of students were talking about their anxiety for the future of society with AI. So it's there. They have anxieties. Maybe it's more of a common theme than we thought. But I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll because we've been chatting a lot about maybe some difficulties we're experiencing, some fears we're experiencing. So I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll here. Oh, wait, I need to stop sharing this before I can launch a new poll. What is your biggest concern with AI in education right now? If we don't use it, students won't have workspace skills they need, which could be very true. If we don't use it, students will adopt it anyway and use it poorly or dishonestly. If we don't use it, students will fall asleep at the wheel. Or if we do use it, and miss important skill development. If we do use it, we are participating in an unethically sound system. And then other explain in chat. So I'd love to hear a little bit about what are your most, I would say, pertinent fears right now, our concerns with AI in education. And yeah, Anna, I didn't ask you this. What is out of all of those different concerns, what's your biggest concern right now?
I don't know. I am concerned about all of them. I would say I've done a lot of work. I actually just put something in the chat about the classes of 24 and 25 in terms of workplace skills. I think we'll get it figured out as we move forward. And then that's the same set of students that high school graduation got taken away by COVID. I mean, it's just like a really right. They were born during, around 9/11. Like there's just like a lot in that group. So they're in my heart. So I think that's a big concern for me. Sleep at the wheel is a big concern for me as well.
Yeah. And I do think that there is some overlap between, if we don't use it, students will learn how to use it incorrectly. And then if we do use it, they'll fall asleep in the wheel. There's probably something in the middle there, which is, if we use it, we really need to be mindful about how we're teaching them to use it so that they use it the right way, but they're also not relying on it too much. They don't build an over reliance to it. Because I think about, like, is there something right now, or let's say a year ago, 2 years ago, we built an over reliance on? Maybe you can argue with COVID, when everything went online, did we build an over reliance on digital communication now in let's say like a subset of students? And did we support an underdevelopment of something else, right? So I always think that's kind of top of mind, is, are we reaching a good balance here when we're teaching a student a new skill?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then again, if you have any questions for Anna and myself, please put them in the Q&A. But otherwise, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts in the chat. I'm keeping up. All right. So moving on to this next topic, before we wrap up our webinar today. So when we were doing a little prep session, I was surprised to see a concept or a topic around trauma-informed care and faculty messaging, because I was like, wait, we're talking about AI. What's happening here? And then you explained the concept, and it became so obvious why we need something like trauma-informed care to inform how we're collaborating regarding AI. So can you share a little bit more about the context of this intersection between trauma-informed care and AI in education?
Yeah, so, one of the things that I have been aware of and tried to bring into my own teaching is that trauma is incredibly pervasive, and we don't need to get too into the weeds here about what that means and why that is and so on. But one of the things that invokes people's previous experiences of trauma is change. And, when you and I talked, Kelsey, we talked about, I don't think we have even begun to process how much change COVID brought to our lives, and how difficult that was on a variety of levels. And even if for you it wasn't that difficult, you're living among people for whom it may have been completely life-changing. So as this kind of came into the scene in our area, we were hit with a devastating hurricane. So as people were trying to figure out what was happening with generative AI, many of our colleagues were literally trying to figure out where they were going to live. Our largest in-person campus went back to remote for the remaining of the semester. So it just kind of clicked in my mind, like, all right, we need to start messaging around this in ways that protect people's nervous system, honestly. And so that's where it came up. And again, innovation is at the heart of our culture. When I brought these ideas up, people weren't like, you're weird. They were like, talk more, like, we want to know.
Yeah, and I think too, like, even just reflecting more on it during COVID, I think about all of my friends who lost jobs because they worked in industries that overnight became unnecessary, right? Like maybe they were working in the event space, and guess what? Events weren't happening anymore. And then a couple months later, they got a job within a virtual event sort of program. So we had this massive job loss with COVID, and now not 3 years later, less than 3 years later, I don't even know how time works anymore. 3 years later, we're being told, oh wait, yeah, all of those jobs that people wake up in the morning to do because they love to write and they love to draw and they love to create, that's actually going to be done by AI now. No worries, right? So we're having it again. It's like, this is wild how quickly these two, I would say, like, highly traumatic events have happened. And when we were talking about it, it's the first time I think I really processed that, oh, this isn't just something new that we need to navigate as educators. This is drastically transformative change in a really short period of time happening within maybe someone's freshman to senior year in college. Yeah.
The CEO of Google said that this is the kind of transformation that fire was. And I was like, all right, then it's not really people keep saying it's like the calculator. I'm like, no, I don't think it's like the calculator. It's much different than that.
It's like when we discovered fire. Yeah. Or Ethan Malik at ASU he said, oh no, this is the singularity. And I was like, oh, okay, awesome. Awesome. Like some really, really wild stuff. But yeah, tell us a little bit more about the kind of tenets of trauma-informed care and how you see it intersecting with the AI collaborative conversations we're having.
Yeah. So when somebody has any kind of experience with trauma, and I'm just going to say this, I feel like it's everybody. When I first learned about trauma-informed care, I didn't think I had trauma in my life, but I was like, okay, this really applies pretty broadly. And these principles, and this is very well documented, very well studied, happy to share out those resources with anyone who wants them, right? But these are things that this started in the mental health space and healthcare spaces. But when people were exposed to these elements, choice, collaboration, trustworthiness, etc., during their care, their trauma was less likely to interfere with their outcomes, with positive outcomes. And, there's been a lot of work to apply this to teaching. And I would suggest that it's also extremely relevant anytime human beings are interacting with one another.
And when you were first kind of chatting about this concept, you were kind of sharing some examples of what trauma-informed care could look like in conversations around AI. So can you share some examples of what it really looks like so like folks can understand how to adopt that language a little bit better?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So one of the things that I think when we're being trauma informed that we can do is ask questions instead of make statements. Not always. I mean, sometimes the statement is the appropriate thing to do. But here's something that absolutely, I can't believe we keep saying this. I see it on LinkedIn probably like every other day. That is this. If ChatGPT can do your assignments, they probably weren't very good assignments in the first place. Alienating, not likely true. And what am I going to do with that? I'm going to put my head in the sand, right? No matter what role I play here. So instead of that, if I see somebody has an assignment that is now going to become problematic, what if instead my approach was, what kinds of choices do you want to make about this assignment? And what kind of support would you like? Not even do you need, would you like? And so that gives a person agency. That gives them this, right, non-accusatory opportunity. I like to use the word on-ramp all the time. Here's a traumatizing message we keep giving people. This is changing so quickly, there's no way to keep up. Like anything that makes you want to pull the covers over your head is probably not trauma-informed, right? Like I just wanted to, pull the covers over my head. So the words that I like to use with people is, what kind of an on-ramp do you need? And let them have their agency and, so on. I'm seeing a lot of stuff in the chat about like, people feel unserved by their institutions right now. And I get to see it a little bit from the administrative perspective. And so people are like, they're not helping us. They're not giving us guidelines. And we're used to that support. We're used to that, comforting presence, even if we don't always agree with the institution, right? There's something about institutions that we may be drawn to. And what's I think traumatic for people is that they feel like there's this gap. They're not helping us. They're not giving us the support that we need. And so I think administrators need to start saying to people, our guidance is evolving and we need your input versus, we don't know, or just not returning emails.
Yeah. And that's difficult too, because I'm sure you put your administrator hat on and you're trying to appease every possible role in the AI conversation, right? Like, how do I appease my innovators, but how do I also appease my guardians? And oh wait, my analyst is going to be upset if I don't have this piece of data. And so maybe they're a little bit like frozen with an action, or they're trying to come up with a solution, and in the meantime not providing guidance. And then on that receiving end, you feel completely stuck and unsupported. So yeah, I think I don't know your experience, Anna, because you play both parts, right? You're an instructional designer, you're administrator, and you're also teaching. So yeah, you have that, I would say, 360 experience where you're on both ends of it. What advice would you give educators who you feel like feel a little bit left in the dark right now?
Yeah, I think I would say if you feel naturally drawn to one of these roles, embrace it, but elevate your contribution now. I think that's what's really important, right? So if you're a guardian, it's no longer helping to say, but students won't get the skills they need if they use AI. Like, everybody has heard that. That's not going to be a novel thing for anybody. I really want to hear from composition people. I really want to hear from language and literature people. How? What are those essential things? Like, help me understand them. Even if I'm going to have a different approach, I would love to know what you know. So really elevate your own contributions. Be as informed as you can. One of the big problems for administrators are problem solvers. That's how they got to be where they are. And I think one of the biggest problems for problem solvers right now is resistance to solutions. So I have people come to me all the time and say, hey, how can I catch students cheating? And I have to say, well, actually, literally, you probably cannot. Sometimes they put regenerate response, and that's a pretty good chance. They copied and pasted the whole thing, and they so you may be there. But what I say is, all right, I can't really help you with that problem, but I do know a little bit about why students cheat, and can we have that conversation? So sometimes we have to give up the problem that we want to have solved, or the approach that we think is the right approach, and look at different ways to solve that problem.
Yeah. I could do a 14-hour long webinar on AI detection, but I will stop myself from doing that. But no, I think that's a great framing, and I want to make sure we have a good amount of time to chat about a resource you've created, because I think it's really helpful. So with that, this is a resource you've created. Can you tell us a little bit more about this resource, who you created with it, and then the purpose of the resource?
Yeah, so, we have launched an Institute of Innovative and Emerging Technologies, like, in the last few weeks. So it's really going to be a super important part of our continuing culture of innovation at FSW. And many of us who are involved in these conversations have been talking and giving presentations and so on. And we really wanted a central hub where we could start sharing the work that we're doing. So this is within that hub, and there'll be a link back to the bigger resource within it. But essentially, we really want to provide people with things that are fully developed, and provide people with things that are being incubated. So I would say this one right now, this is in the incubator, and it's it's largely related to what we've talked about today. But these are things that you can go copy and paste and use and on your own. Yeah, if you follow that link, that'll take you out to the larger site. We created a student resource in here that is really awesome. We call it our student toolkit. And there are micro-credential badges that students can earn in the basics, the ethics, and application of generative AI. And for Canvas users, we can send it out to you right in Canvas. But if you don't use Canvas, you can go here to the Rise platform and copy and paste anything that is helpful to you.
Yeah. So could you explain a little bit more about how maybe, like, I'm a I'm an instructor, I'm interested in learning more about AI. Should I just click around this, or is there a certain sort of use case that you envision folks using this for?
Yeah, it's a great question. If you click down, I think it's like maybe the second to last, not this one more. All right, so these are our idea incubators. So one was this one that we just had. This next one called relevance and reflection. This is something that I think is a really nice dipping your toe in. So when students or when faculty say, how do I minimize cheating? I think the answer is motivation. I think all of my eggs are in the motivation basket. As a teacher, as a designer, as an administrator, they're all in that basket. And so relevance in particular is one of the reasons students tell us why they cheat. This isn't important to me. It's a roadblock that I have to overcome. It's not relevant to me. So I love the use case of AI to show students how what you're teaching. I teach intro to humanities. Imagine how often I get asked, why do we need to learn this? And AI helps them answer that question for themselves. So I think that's a really good use case. And then you could put it in a pack-back discussion and, really it incorporates all kinds of different ways to incorporate it.
Yeah. And just to double click on that too, this idea of motivation, especially now that we're finding out that AI generated text detection isn't reliable, it's potentially biased. I think we're going to see a mass shift in educator behavior. And I personally hope to see it as somebody who hated catching students, is how do I put more emphasis on preventing my students from cheating in the first place than I do on trying to catch them after the fact. It's like, what can we be doing before they even press submit? How can we be giving them more support so they feel more confident? How can we be more clear in our guidelines so they're not sitting there with confused as to where to start and then just don't start because they don't know how? Or how do we make an assignment so meaningful and purposeful for students so they want to do it because they know that it'll have a difference in their learning and they want to learn. Motivation, it's so important. I think sometimes we forget that we just have to motivate these lizard brain, college kids to want to learn.
Yeah. If you ask students why they cheat, they will say because they're stressed out. And so what I would say is look at your course and are there elements of your course that create stress that doesn't contribute to learning? If so, get them out of there, right? Learning creates stress, so there's no way to take it all out. But if you have midnight deadlines, there's no reason to have an assignment due at midnight. When cognitive resources are at their lowest, like that's it. That's a low-hanging fruit right there.
Yeah. I love that. A good guide of low-hanging fruit. That sounds like a good good guide for us. Well, Anna, thank you so much. I saw a lot of notes in the chat saying thank you for having this conversation. And again, like I give 100% creativity and content, cite my sources to Anna over here who said, please, like, can we have an honest discussion about what it actually feels like? And to close us out, because we've got about 2 minutes left together, I'm going to appease the audience here. Rufus, would you mind taking us out with a reflection or maybe just your thoughts on this topic of AI roles and roles in the AI collaborative conversation?
The only comment that I would make is when I listen to these conversations over the last few months, I'm just wondering about the value and the timing of collaboration across the K-12 continuum to the K-12 system, to the community colleges, to the universities. Should we be having conversations together, and when should it start? And if it's already started, how do we get connected? So those are just some thoughts.
I love that. Well, Anna, any last thoughts before we close out the session? And thank you so much again for joining us here.
Yeah, I would just, to answer Dr. Glasper's question, I would say it should start now. Let's start that now. Absolutely. Thank you for having this conversation, because I think it probably is touching something for a lot of different people. So I appreciate that you were able to go a little bit off the plan.
I'm always down. I'm always down to improvise. We got to be agile, you know, it's 2023. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Thank you for our panelist, Anna. And then, as always, thank you so much, Rufus, for hosting this space for us with the Leap for Innovation in the Community College. So thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful week. Enjoy your Thursday, Friday. And see you all hopefully a month from now. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Great job. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.